Would you please turn your mobile phones onto silent? Thank you. My name is Richard Elkington. I'm the President of the Board of Freemasons Victoria, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Queen's Hall today for the launch of this very exciting Starting the Conversation event. I acknowledge we're gathered on the lands of the Kulin Nation, and I pay respects to their elders past and present and celebrate their traditional and contemporary expression. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen and brethren, it's my delight to welcome Minister Martin Foley, who is the Shadow Minister for Mental Health amongst a whole range of portfolios. Emma Kealy, the Member for Lowan, who is the Shadow Minister for Mental Health. All other Members of Parliament that are present this afternoon. Sarah Clark, Mirvac's Group General Manager of Sustainability and Reputation. A number of our stakeholders, and of course, a number of Freemasons. What better place to be, gathered in Queen's Hall, to be surrounded by a prominent display about the paradise in which I live, the Latrobe Valley. So I invite you all, before we depart this afternoon, to take advantage of this wonderful display of all the good things about Gippsland and the Latrobe Valley. In fact, there's a gentleman at the back. He's just waiting to give you a taste of that fabulous wine from Glengarry, Narcoogee.
Against my licence.
As I said at the start, the Starting the Conversation is a special part of a campaign aimed at suicide prevention. And it's very gratifying. I guess as a society, this is something we would expect to have bipartisan support on an issue which impacts on the entire community. And we'll hear later from the Minister for Mental Health and also the Shadow Minister. And we're using social media today to get them spread the message out far and wide on the fabulous Freemasons Victoria network of almost 10,000 members. So if you don't want to be included in the live streaming, then turn away. And please feel free to take your own photographs and spread this important message. And it's receiving essentially a lot of publicity this week in a range of media. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Grand Master of Freemasons Victoria, Don Reynolds, to give us a short address. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Richard. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all present who have been affected by an act which impacts loved ones, families and communities, either directly or through those who have a connection to the pain of suicide. Sometimes a last-minute decision can change the course of action. Isaac Newton knew this as his third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. A little time ago, one of the members of Freemasons Victoria made one of those decisions when he ignored his prepared speech on suicide prevention and instead recited a poem. Not even he envisaged the powerful response he would witness. A member of our organisation who has been personally touched by an act of suicide. He knows the importance of opening the lines of communication and discussing the subject. To listen to those who are hurting, to families, friends and colleagues. Last year, this member of our organisation was supported by the Freemasons of Bellarine and South West Victoria, and together with the Freemasons Foundation Victoria Limited, raised substantial funds for the Support After Suicide service in Geelong. We acknowledge the presence here today of representatives of this service and appreciate their valuable work in the Geelong and district community. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, a Roman philosopher and advisor to Emperor Nero, noted that sometimes even to live is an act of courage. In recognising the impact of depression and its relationship with suicide, Freemasons Victoria, together with our partner Mirvac, are committed to increasing community awareness about the impact of this important issue. I am pleased to be able to share today, on the threshold of Men's Health Week, that poem, penned by Murray Hartin, an Australian bush poet, titled Rain from Nowhere, and to introduce to you a member of Freemasons Victoria, someone passionate about helping others, and to assist me to officially launch a joint initiative between Freemasons Victoria and Mirvac, centred on a campaign for suicide prevention. Would you please put your hands together for Brother John Patterson.
Thank you, Don, and thank you to Freemasons Victoria for getting behind this very important subject. A few statistics. Up until the last lot were collected in 2015, 3.3 people died on the Australian roads. 8.3 people die through suicide every day in Australia. The poem Rain from Nowhere is about a father who talks to his son, and he does it through a letter. I ask you to give people 5 minutes when you think something is wrong. That's what this is all about. Giving them time, letting them know that we love them. Rain from nowhere. His cattle didn't get a bid. They were fairly bloody poor. What was he going to do? He couldn't feed them anymore. The dams were all but dry. Hay was $13 a bale. Last month's talk of rain was just a fairy tale. His credit had run out. No chance to pay what's owed. Dark thoughts ran through his head as he drove down Gully Road. Geez, great-granddad bought the place back in 1898. Now I'm such a useless bastard, I'll have to shut the gate. Can't support my wife and kids, not like Dad and those before. Crikey, Grandma kept it going while Pop fought in the war. With depression now his master, he abandoned all that's right. There's no place in life for failures. He'd end it all tonight. There were still some things to do. He'd have to shoot the cattle first. Of all the jobs he'd ever done, that would be the worst. He'd have a shower, watch the news, then they'd all sit down for tea, read his kids a bedtime story, watch some more TV, kiss his wife goodnight, say he was off to shoot some roos. Then in a paddock, far away, he'd blow away the blues. But he drove in the gate and stopped, as he always had, to check the roadside mailbox and found a letter from his dad. Now his dad was not a writer. His mum did all the cards and mail. But he knew the writing from notebooks he'd kept from cattle sales. He sensed the nature of its contents, felt moisture in his eyes. Just the fact his dad had written was enough to make him cry. Son, I know it's bloody tough, this cruel and twisted game, this life upon the land when you're screaming out for rain. There's no candle in the darkness, not a single speck of light. But don't let the demon get you. You've got to do what's right. I don't know what's in your head, but put the dark thoughts well away. See, you've always got your family at the back end of the day. You have to talk to someone. And yes, I know I really did, but you have to think about Fiona and think about the kids. I'm worried about you, son. You haven't called for quite a while. I know the road you're on because I've walked every bloody mile. The date, December 7, back in 1983, behind the shed. I had a shotgun, rested in the brigalow tree. See, I borrowed way too much to buy the Johnson place. And then it didn't rain for years and we got bombed by interest rates. The bank was at the door. I didn't think I had a choice. I began to squeeze the trigger. That's when I heard your voice. You said, "Where are you, Daddy? It's time to play our game. I've got the squatter all set up. We might get General Rain." It really was that close. You're the one that stopped me, son. You're the one that taught me there's no answer in a gun. Just remember, people love you. Good friends won't let you down. Look, you might have to swallow pride and take that job in town just till things come good, son. You've always got a choice. And when you get this letter, ring me, because I'd love to hear your voice. Well, he cried and laughed and shook his head and put the truck in gear, closed his eyes and hugged his dad in a vision that was clear, dropped the cattle at the yards, put the truck away, filled the troughs as best he could, then fed his last 10 bales of hay. Then he strode towards the homestead, shoulders back and head held high. He still knew the road was tough, but there was purpose in his eyes. He called his wife and children who'd lived through all their pain. Hugs said more than words. He'd come back to them again. They talked of silver linings, how good times always follows bad. And then he walked towards the phone, picked it up and rang his dad. And while the kids set up the squatter, he hugged his wife again. And then they heard the roll of thunder and they smelt the smell of rain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for that very emotional delivery of that poem by Murray Hartin called The Rain from Nowhere. Of course, as Freemasons, we like to believe that our lodges are havens of peace, love and harmony, where men can meet together and be supported by one of the fundamental precepts of our organisation, which is brotherly love. I'd like now to introduce the Minister for Mental Health, Martin Foley.
Thank you, Richard. And could I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that this is the land of the Wurundjeri and their close cousins, the Bunurong, and their continuing stewardship of this land. There's many people to acknowledge. Thank you, Richard, for hosting this event. Can I thank Don as the Grand Master, John for that very powerful, emotionally challenging but beautifully delivered poem that speaks more than I suspect the words that I can say. Can I acknowledge also Jane Sydenham-Clark, the Chief Executive Officer of the Freemasons Victoria, Bruce Cowie, the Grand Secretary, Miles as Grand Director of Ceremonies, and in fact all the members of Parliament from all the political parties from both houses who are here, and everyone else. You're all very important to us today. and can I particularly acknowledge Emma Kealy as the Shadow Minister for Mental Health, because I think what this event here at Parliament House reflects, as we heard in the introduction, is the genuinely above politics nature of some issues in our community. And we heard the number of deaths through suicide that we have nationally. The most recent figures that we have for Victoria from 2015 show that over 650 of those deaths were in Victoria. And that we would expect, sadly, when we see the most recent figures from last year, that that number will have increased. And the drivers of that are many and complicated, but we also know from the figures and the data that regional Victoria is disproportionately overrepresented in those figures. And when you construct that data in such a way, the emphasis about where our actions need to disproportionately be reflected is reflected in some of the work that you do. And to do this with the support of Mirvac, who I also acknowledge on the cusp of Men's Health Week, is also very important, because of course it is males who are far and away overrepresented in those suicide statistics. But as a measure of just how I'd like to think this issue is above the ruck of day-to-day politics, we recently had the Mental Health Minister's phone hook-up about the next mental health plan from the Commonwealth, of which the Victorian 10-year mental health plan forms a policy subset of, I'd like to think, in the best possible ways. And I pay tribute to the Federal Minister for Health, Greg Hunt, who chaired that meeting, but also by the courtesy of the fact that he, particularly through sadly his own family's lived experience, has put suicide prevention right at the heart of that next 5th National Mental Health Plan. And that is a very important bipartisan position that I know states and territories and the Commonwealth, regardless of their political colour, share. Because, as we've heard, each and every suicide is a tragedy, it's a family, it's a community, it's a ripple effect that there is not a community, there is not a town, there is not a suburb, and nor is there a family that is untouched by that. Only last week I had cause to speak with a family in my own community whose beautiful son had taken his own life in very tragic circumstances. And whilst we know that there are particular drivers of mental health or alcohol and drug or gender diversity or same-sex attracted or Indigenous factors that are overrepresented in suicides, we also know that no family is immune from it, and that sometimes, seemingly out of the blue, every family can be struck by this at the time it happens, shocking loss that so many of us endure. So to see the work that Freemasons Victoria, particularly in the regions, but in partnership now with Mirvac here on the cusp of Men's Health Week, to take this message about dealing with the stigma, with the discrimination that overlays so much of holding back our conversations around mental health and around suicide prevention is extremely important. I know it's an important issue that will continue to gain prominence. I'm very pleased that our partnership with the federal government has been able to see our suicide prevention strategy, which has both a clinical and a community focus to it, double in its community focus by courtesy of the fact that the Commonwealth, through the public health networks, has been able to partner with us. And I look forward to not just those 12 regions and not just those 6 health networks leading the charge in these conversations, but more importantly, driving these conversations with community groups such as Freemasons Victoria, with corporate support and philanthropic support such as that lent by Mirvac, to take this really important conversation into every community, into every suburb and into every town, to make sure that the kind of story that is reflected so beautifully in the poem we heard is played out, and that there is always hope, there is always someone to talk to, and that even when it's the darkest of night, the light is not too far away. And that's the message that we need to bring to so many people who sadly look to suicide as a solution to problems that seem insurmountable, but with support, with engagement, never are. And I think the message that Freemasons Victoria leaves us with that is that this is a very important project. It's one that the whole community is backing you on, and I look forward to its continuing success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for a very sensitive address on a very important subject. Our final speaker is our Shadow Minister for Mental Health, Emma Kealy, who's the member for Lowen, which I guess covers the Wimmera and part of the Western District of Victoria. Who has a background in the health industry, so please welcome the Shadow Minister for Mental Health, Emma Kealy.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for the fantastic words of all of our previous speakers, and particularly for that very moving rendition by Paddo. Paddo, of course, lost his brother Charles 23 years ago, and I think that I'd like to make mention of everybody who's here today who has been touched by suicide. It has been, of course, one of those journeys through life that often it is a family member, it's a friend, it's somebody you went to school with, it's somebody you work with who has taken their own life. This morning I had breakfast with a friend of mine from Horsham, and I was saddened to hear that yet again we hear the story of a young man in his mid-30s who had taken his own life earlier this week. It's the same comments that we hear every single time when we hear of a loved one who's passed away, who's taken their own life. He was questioning, that he seemed okay. He seemed happy enough. He was always a knockabout bloke and was easy to talk to. I didn't know anything was wrong. If I had have known, I would have done something differently. And reflecting on what he could have done to make a difference and to have saved this young man's life. And I think that's one of the most important things about this suicide campaign, which is being launched by Freemasons Victoria today with the very generous support of Mirvac, is around starting the conversation. As Paddo said, it's around finding 5 minutes when you notice that someone isn't quite right, of asking the question, how are you going, mate? What can I do to help you? What can I do to try and change the outcome that you might be thinking about? And you know what? If you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. They might start talking about the weather, they might not, but to just show that you care and you support somebody is sometimes all that you need, as is beautifully outlined in the words of the poem that were recited today. I think there is another side to starting the conversation, though, that is very, very important. Nearly half of all Australians will be affected by mental health issues at some time during their lives. So it may be us that are the ones who are facing depression or anxiety and finding life a little bit tough. And it's at that point that we need to take pause and start the conversation ourselves. It might be to talk to a friend or a family member or a professional, a counsellor, a social worker, a GP, to say, I'm having thoughts that are quite dark. It's not right. I need some help to get out of this place because I don't want to be here. And we need to make sure that we're confident in having that conversation in the same way we need to be confident in listening to those conversations. I commend the work of Freemasons Victoria. This is an outstanding campaign that I'm sure will make a difference to so many Victorians, obviously particularly those in regional Victoria where this campaign is targeted through this moving poem. I know that you will make a difference through this, and of course any support that my parliamentary colleagues can provide, I'm certain that they will. I wish you all the very, very best, and I commend you for this initiative. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Emma. That concludes the formal proceedings. Thank you one and all for attending and supporting this important mental health initiative. I guess the message I take away from today is we need to revive the lost art of conversation. Nothing astounded me more than to be managing a power station where people on opposite sides of the aisle would send each other emails. Such is the nature of today's society. So, powerful message from all of our speakers about this very important subject. Just take the time to have a conversation and inquire as to their well-being. And we'd like to think in Freemasonry we do that. So thanks very much for coming. Please take a copy of the Freemasons Victoria journal with you. If you want to see a video of this afternoon's proceedings, you can obtain that on the Freemasons Victoria website. Is that correct? Freemasons Victoria website. But please spread the message. Start having the conversations. Thanks very much for your support.